house for fixing this table. It's not making any noise.
Okay, we are back, and we are now moving on to our discussion items. First item is discussion item A, Board Policy 3550, Food Service / Child Nutrition Program.
The board asked for an opportunity to review the wellness policy and hear from each school principal on the results of their site-based meetings where they took input on this topic. And so we've asked each elementary principal to come and summarize the results of that meeting, and then the board at the end will have an opportunity to discuss this issue. So we can call each principal up one at a time to share with us their information. And so let me ask Ken, which one up first? Which on the spot? You're bright red.
He's happy. You guys are wearing red.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a target.
Love the tie.
So, thank you, members of the board. What Debbie has passed out to you are two documents. I'm going to briefly go over the first. On the back of your packet, there is actually the notes that were taken by Jody and Charlene at the actual meeting, which was held on October 20th. You can see the parents and the teachers and the members of attendance. And the process for Sleepy Hollow was that I went through the slides and guidelines for the evening, requesting feedback from the parent community on the board policy. And then we opened it up for discussion. Rather than go through all that aggregated data, what I did was I've come up with three themes, three general themes that I'm going to quickly go over it with you, and then you'll be able to ask me questions on any specifics of the meeting. But from the evening, it was a very well-attended meeting. We had lots of input. The first theme that I was able to glean from the notes was that the parents who were present were very critical of the lack of communication of the new birthday practice and lack of parental input in this decision. And what I have for you is about 5 quotes from that evening that summarize that perspective. The first quote was that there was a communication failure. One other parent said there wasn't enough of a forum before the decision was handed down to us, meaning the parents. The dialogue should continue and that there should be more transparency. And that particular parent wanted to see what other schools discussed in their wellness forums. Another parent said, moving forward, no decision should be made without feedback from the parents. Another parent suggestion was that comment was that the ban seemed so aggressive. This is the ban on sugary treats for birthday treats, and asked why wasn't there a happy medium discussed. And then the last comment that I have on my document is that a district-wide survey was needed for parents to speak their mind. That was a request from a parent. Second theme was that throughout the evening there was a plea to find some kind of common ground among parents and for possible food alternatives. One parent suggested that if parents wanted to bring treats, the school should provide a list of pre-approved snacks. Another parent suggested that there should be common ground so we can get back to celebration for the students, and suggested that anti-snacks could be brought in. Another comment from a parent was that perhaps there should be a monthly celebration in the classroom for all birthdays. And then the last comment for that particular theme was, again, getting to the happy medium. And this particular parent didn't like the way that it was decided, meaning the ban on sugary treats for birthdays without an open forum. There was another significant theme from that evening, and I have 4 comments that would back that up, would be that among the parents gathered, they had many different views on what exactly was student nutrition. One parent said that it was too complicated to judge what good food is to all. Another parent comment was that this particular parent didn't want anybody feeding their child. And there were a couple comments made to this point that people have different views on what is nutrition and what's nutritious. And then the other comment was wholesome is a subjective term. So those were the three themes. I do have on the second page some other comments of note that I thought that I should bring to the board's attention. One was that of the 20 or so odd people who were present, 4 people supported the policy. When they refer to policy, they're actually referring to the practice. There was support for the policy, obviously, Board Policy 3550, but also support for the practice of no longer having sugary treats brought in for birthdays. There was a suggestion that perhaps we should research what other school districts do. One parent suggested that it looked like the principals took the easy way out in making this decision. One parent observed, or gave the observation, that it seemed as if most children were not upset by, again, the practice, meaning she said policy, but this is the practice. An observation was made that the teachers are nervous to be the police on the birthday policy, so it seemed to her that it was just easier to ban all birthday treats. And then there was a really interesting discussion based on food as a part of socialization, that we, meaning the school, should not take that away from the students, but we should encourage healthy eating. So I've tried to give the board a summary of the parent input that was given on October 20th, and I can now take any questions.
Ken, did you get input from teachers on their position on this, your side?
Yes, I did.
And what's that, what can you share with me? Generally.
I think it runs the gamut. I think there are some teachers who, I think all teachers initially were suspicious or taken aback by it, but I think now there are some teachers who see that it has, there are a lot less sugary treats in the school now. But I still believe that the main feedback that I get from teachers is a hesitancy to really be involved as the gatekeeper for any kind of sugary treats. One of the things that's coming up is that I believe that at Sleepy Hollow, I can't speak for any other school, is that there's been a general adherence to the practice that we have implemented, but it has been shaky and there has been lots of grumbling. And I think that the teachers are very wary about being in the middle of that. I think that, I haven't asked the question directly, but I think some of the teachers are understanding the reason for the board policy. Now I'm separating the two. There's the policy, which is on student nutrition, which is very common sense. And then the practice, which was that we principals decided to stop sugary treats for birthdays. But I still think that the jury's out with a lot of teachers.
And are parents pressuring teachers about this? Are parents putting pressure on teachers to be able to provide sugary treats at birthdays?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if
It's
they're
not
putting
getting us
pressure
out
as much. I'm getting a lot of pressure, I can tell you. But again, and I do believe that teachers are getting pressure, but the way that we're handling it at Sleepy Hollow is that if the teachers get any communication about this, they pass it off to me. And so I'm doing my best. But I would say that there has been, by and large, despite, I would say, a large group, perhaps half of the parents at Sleepy Hollow, really not agreeing with the practice that we're trying this year, there has been pretty much adherence to it. There are some things that are coming up that are maybe not one-offs, but situations that we didn't anticipate that continue to come to my attention and that continue to, I think, bring this topic up at the school. And I think there are some complexities to this issue that will continue at not only Sleepy Hollow, but other schools.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken, for making the distinction between policy and practice, because I've been reading the comments and, the policy doesn't say you can't have
Right.
sugar. So I really appreciate that distinction. So I just wanted to clarify, you said that it's about, you estimate 50%.
Well, I don't know. I think of the people who get my attention, it's about 50%. But I haven't really polled the whole school. I do know that it's come to my attention, and I've been told that there are a lot of disgruntled parents who not only feel that there wasn't parental input on the decision, but that they really have a basic fundamental disagreement about the decision. To summarize it, I think that many parents, as I said in the notes for you. They have different opinions and different perceptions of what constitutes student nutrition. They have different opinions and about what role food should play not only in a child's life, but in a child's school life. So it continues to be just widely discussed at the school.
Any other questions for Dr. Gallegos?
Later on, Julia, I want to talk about process and other questions, but while Ken is up here, I wanted to thank him for this really thoughtful summary of the feedback. I was able to go to 2 others, but not Sleepy Hollow, and I know it's Sleepy Hollow and another school, Glorietta. There's strong feelings about this. One comment I wanted to make about your comments is the comment that it seems principals took the easy way out. I want to thank you and the other principals for doing a hard thing, which is pulling people together for this dialogue. I think this is more than about updates, it's about parental involvement in decisions and all the things that you're reflecting here. So I want to thank you for taking the time for that. It wasn't easy, for making that forum a welcoming place for both sides, and I've heard that from people who felt strongly on both sides of that debate, and for summarizing it like this. It's very helpful, and I think it's important we talk about it.
I appreciate that. And my final comment is that, and in fact I communicated this to a parent just today, is that I think that since last spring, when the administration, the leadership team re-examined the board policy, which was, we reacquainted ourselves with that, and then this fall we implemented this new practice. I think that at Sleepy Hollow, I could say that the level of sugar or sweets that the children are getting at school has been reduced drastically. And I can say that in all with comfort. But I also feel that this is a situation where there are going to be some situations where both the pro-sugar people and the anti-sugar people, but one parent at the meeting even called the whole situation Sugargate. I think that people need to trust in the judgment of the teachers and the school, and that there are going to be some situations where some kind of treat may have a nexus to what's going on in the classroom, and that this may be a rare instance, and I think that we really need to avoid what they call binary thinking on this, and really try to be flexible. Again, I feel as the administrator of the school that we have made huge strides in improving the overall quality of the food the students we've made huge strides in making sure that the students are not getting 2 to 3 or 4 sugary treats a week, sometimes 2 a day. That just doesn't happen anymore. And so I think that if that was the goal, and that was the goal of the practice, which is in spirit and fidelity to the policy, then I feel like we've made great strides. Has a child had a slice of pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving? Yes. They did. And so I think that the whole parent group really needs to put this into a larger perspective.
Thank you.
Jim?
Well, this will be an interesting juxtaposition because
On the other hand.
exactly. Wagner Ranch was very simple, and I keep it short and sweet. Pardon the pun. So shortly after the staff development, well, the same day as the staff development day in August, before the school year began, I convened with the teachers to talk about the district's wellness policy and what we just learned from the speakers, and we began to work through it. And it was very quick and easy, and it was, I was pretty new with working with staff, but it was very quick and easy that we came to consensus that we would not have food at our birthday celebrations. But within 5 minutes, we reached consensus on that. I don't think it was completely new territory for Wagner Ranch, and that the first grade for at least 6 years has had no food at birthday parties in the first grade. So I think, parents went through the first grade and became accustomed to it. And teachers have certainly found first grade, and probably others, other ways to celebrate birthdays at Wagner Ranch that don't involve food. I announced to our parents through one of the weekly electronic newsletter, that we would not have food at birthday parties. I did that ahead of the teachers, and then teachers discussed it in various ways, through back to school night or through their weekly communications to parents. I had not a single complaint, not email, not telephone, nothing. I had one email that was very supportive of the policy, but nobody who had anything negative to say about it. I'm sure there's a little bit of grumbling out there, but nothing that rose to the level of coming to me. We did hold our meeting on October 8th. Jason was there. We had 6 parents attend, all of whom were in favor of the practice of no food at birthday parties. So I hate to be a party pooper, but it's a non-issue of Wagner Ranch at this point. Knock on wood, it'll stay such. Do you have any questions for me?
I loved one of the comments, I just have to repeat it, of one of the parents who was there saying, gee, it's wonderful that we're not having a controversy at Wagner.
Agreed.
That is wonderful.
That's a first.
Any other questions from the board? Your teachers, did you state, did you have much feedback from the teachers on it?
Well, they're not receiving complaints either, and they came to consensus around it. Like I said, the staff development day before school began, they were in complete consensus, so it's not been an issue.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ron, you want to put?
Sure.
Let's pull her off.
Well, we don't have a garden, so we had to complain about something. So
Oh, and an apiary.
So we had, I think we had the most folks come out. We had 25 participants join us mid-October for a nice evening. Actually, it was, I prefaced it and people were very cordial, and it was I thought it was very productive, and definitely a lot of varied viewpoints, but people were very willing to listen and to work with each other. The steps we used, well, for this evening, the process was I reviewed the action steps taken to date. We then I reviewed the board policy, and then obviously the most important component was getting some feedback from folks regarding to current practices as well as recommendations for potential next steps. The steps we took were similar to the other sites, or actually the same, and this was through a conversation that we as a staff had together. Initially, we removed or eliminated all sugar in the form of recognition for student birthdays, as well as acknowledgement for incidental things that may take place on campus or in the classroom. Traditional grade level celebrations we resumed those with the understanding or the request that we are more aware and sensitive to the types of foods and products that or items that we provide the students. So basically reducing the sugary foods as well as the fatty foods that we have for these various celebrations. And that the room parents work in conjunction with the classroom teachers in setting up these events to kind of ensure that there was a little thought into the process, so that we don't end up with overabundance of cookies, donuts, and such. Regarding the initial, I posed a couple of questions. The first one: do current practices align with the board policy? Which was kind of our kickoff question. And of the folks present, there was one certificated or one classroom teacher. The rest were parents. 16 said yes, 6 said no, and 1 abstained to that question. And then based on that information, asked for some feedback. And like Ken said, the comments varied and there were a lot of similarities. Some felt that the no recognition treats is working at this time, so they appreciated the manner in which we, the actions that we took. Teachers supported current practices, but were reluctant in policing this ongoing effort. Some felt that current practices do not align with board policy, and questioned why it came about. And again, communication was a big, and communication and process were the two things that repeated themselves multiple times that evening. Others questioned why policies and practices failed to protect those with severe food allergies, and there were a few present that expressed their concerns and frustrations about the nut allergies that their children have, and that we don't have anything in place to really systematically protect their children. Questions about inconsistency of practices came up as it related to parent-sponsored event and lunchtime offerings. Education was a piece that was suggested and a recommendation that was made towards the end of our meeting. It was felt that allowing traditional classroom events was a good compromise, and people appreciated the fact that we didn't eliminate a lot or all the social and traditional activities and events that students look forward to on an annual basis. Some felt that without a clear line, food will continue to be a problem in our school. So they were eager to know next steps, and our policy is going to be more black and white. Again, lack of communication. And regarding recommendations, clearly defined policy and consistent practices was something that was echoed by many. Address allergy issues rather than current trends. Some felt that that should be the focus and priority. Compromise was host monthly birthday celebrations with healthy snacks and or clear defined options was a suggestion made. Publicize birthday alternatives, which we've done and have posted on our website. And then educate versus ban, focus on promoting healthy, balanced food rather than banning foods that many bring for snack and lunch on a daily basis. And that was an hour's worth of quality time.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Thank you. I'd like to ask, sorry, the question that Matt had asked to Ken was about the teacher feedback. You had one teacher at your event, you said.
We did discuss this at a staff meeting, and like Ken said, the feelings were mutual to what was felt at Sleepy, in that there were quite a few felt that it was hard enforcing, policing this, and that although many don't have a practice of currently not of having food as part of their parties, and it's practice that they've shared with their parents, some appreciating having the opportunity to have a cupcake every once in a while. So there was just a lot of varied thoughts about that.
No notes because they're on my table in my office. But I do know, I mean, we are very much like Wagner at Delray, where it was not a huge issue for us. I think Julie and Jason, we were both there. We had a handful of people, and it was a mixed bag of responses, from being very supportive and thankful that we were caring more about what we were allowing to go into students' bodies, to others or another who felt like her cooking something special for her children on their birthday was an act of love and part of how they show their love for their families, and so it was a very respectful conversation. Nothing huge, in either way. We started the same way, all of us did. Teachers quickly came to consensus on this one, but I can't say they loved it. It was just, how can we make an effort to move toward healthier eating at school, and the birthday policies, the birthday celebration treats. That was one that we could land upon and say, okay, we can all get behind it. It was really important that they agreed, and they talked about, teachers, I'm talking about, talked about it first, because if one person undermined by sneaking in a birthday treat, it throws everybody else under the bus, and they all, that was out on the table and talked about, and so they made that agreement. Not everybody was happy right away, but I can say now that several have come and said it is really kind of nice that they've come up with alternatives and that it's working well. Some of them have, some choice time for students on their birthday. They get to choose an activity for a few minutes of that day. There have been birthday books that come in. There's a classroom that has a pretend birthday cake with candles that light up, and then the kid runs around with this fake birthday cake, and there are all sorts of different things, and I think everybody has been okay with it. I have not received any negative emails about this issue. I've only received thank you emails about this issue.
Thank you. Any questions?
Not a question, but I'd like to make the same comment. I really appreciated in that conversation what I think happened at all the campuses is there was a parent near the end who had felt pretty strongly, and she was in the minority of the room, and I really appreciated the way you opened up the ability for her to comment. I think I just want to thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Jason, I know you mentioned you had some comments you wanted to make, but I thought maybe we could take it out to public comment and then come back for our discussion.
So we're not gonna comment first, or?
Well, usually we do questions, so I thought we were doing the questions sort of as we went here.
But a lot of times we let the public comment after we ask our questions or have a little bit of discussion. Are you saying we already asked
Well, I'm saying,
questions?
right, that we asked our questions, we would go to comment and then come back for our discussion. Okay, I do have a speaker card on this from Naomi Greenstone.
My points were sort of raised by the other principals, so
Okay,
I'm happy to
okay.
pass.
Are there any other public comments?
Yes.
Yes, I'm talking a lot tonight, and I'm not apologetic about it. I just want to say really quick that in my lifetime, yes, I am 50, I've had a long life so far, and I've met a lot of people. I remember having a roommate, I remember students who had strict dietary, the parents were really strict about their diets, and it was interesting, when we had parties and there were some sweet treats, they would feast because they're not allowed to have it. Roommates were like that in college, and it made me understand what my mother always said. All things in moderation. Talk to kids about that. I just had a month-long study of our heritage, looking at the diversity of students in our room and where their ancestors came from. And we had a party, and I talked to the parents, in an email. I said, let's try to limit the sugar. And when the food came, there was a few things that had sugar, I'll admit. And I talked to the kids about, we're going to cut them into really small portions, and let's be careful. Sugar isn't, the best for us, but it's there, and we have choices to make, and someday you're going to have to make tough choices about how much sugar you consume. And I really think that I'm teaching my kids to think about that they have to take care of their health, but it's okay once in a while. Let's be reasonable. We all eat sweets. In our staff room, we have sweets. I can't have dairy. People enjoy ice cream, and I wish I could have some ice cream. But there are alternatives that I eat. I'm okay with it. Because my mother taught me everything in moderation, and those things that really you can't have because you're allergic, you just can't have. But you'll have to have something, an alternative. And I think it's the best thing we can do for our kids is to teach them that, there's some things that are not really good for us, and we shouldn't eat a whole lot of that. But, once in a while it's okay. That's my personal belief. It's not my OEA belief. Different hat. But I think it worked in my classroom, and I appreciate my parents understanding that. And birthdays, we have alternatives. We don't bring in cupcakes or any kind of sweet treats, and that's worked beautifully. No one has complained.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Back to the board.
Well, I wanted to make a couple of comments, and I know, Jason, you mentioned you went to one or two of the meetings, and I just wanted to state, I didn't go to any of the meetings that the principals had at the schools, because I felt like I wanted to let the parents speak up without me there, you know, just to make sure that they would feel completely comfortable. And I want to state that this is the first time, even though we've gotten lots of emails as a board, and I know there was a petition a few months ago, this is the first time this issue has been on our agenda. And I just wanted to say that because I did get comments from parents in emails saying, why did the board make this decision on birthday treats? The board hasn't even had this on our agenda up until this point. But I wanted to say that I look at this in two ways. One is that we got the board policy, two different board policies, and we could decide whether to make any revisions to that. And then the other issue is just the whole communication and process issue, which some of the principals brought up, which doesn't exactly relate to the board policy, but given that this affects every parent, every student, every school, it seems to me that that's something we should discuss. But I wanted to talk about the policy first and say, regarding these two board policies, 3550, that one was, if you look at the end of it, it was approved in June 5th, 2006. We haven't revised it since that time. The second policy, student wellness, board policy 5060, was approved April 7th, 2008. So we might want to consider whether to revise them. But specifically, I wanted to point out in board policy 5030, we do have a paragraph, the second paragraph here, which I want to read. It basically gives some authority away from the board, essentially, because it says the district coordinating council will consult with the district on health-related issues, activities, policies, and programs. At the discretion of the superintendent or designee, the council's charges may include planning and implementing activities to promote health within the school or community. So I believe I haven't asked Joe, but I assumed that it was because of this paragraph, or just because of the way that Parents Club presidents communicate with the district, that I know this was brought up at coordinating council at one point last year, and I wasn't at that meeting, so I wasn't privy to all the whatever discussion happened. But, you know, we could consider whether we want that paragraph to continue in there, whether we want to revise our policy. But I do think that it makes, I liked the fact that in Sleepy Hollow's comments, they said a district-wide survey is needed. I've heard that from other parents at other schools, and I think that's a really good way to get communication. So I'm thinking that might be something we might want to consider. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I think this is about both process and policy. And on process, I'd like to agree with Sarah that the policy itself speaks about the coordinating council sort of being a generator of this, of how to implement the board policies. And I don't think that's quite the way things happen. And I, as a board member, am a little frustrated at the way. I'm very happy that the dialogue came out and people were able to express their views, but that they didn't have the opportunity to express the views through the process, I think, is what led to a lot of the controversy. My sense is that the coordinating council didn't come to a consensus that then was implemented through. And I have to say, I'm probably in the minority of people at Ron's meeting about whether the decision is really completely consistent with the policy. policy on several occasions talks about encouraging healthy choices. And encouraging healthy choices is through, like some of the comments we see here, educating people and, encouraging a choice as opposed to making a black and white line on it. So I think process-wise, we have something to talk a little bit about, and I don't know where we go from here, but also policy-wise, at least for me, and I'd be curious to hear from the board, because like Sarah said, as a board, we haven't discussed this before.
So, first of all, I want to thank the principals because on some level, I was part of the group that asked you guys to do this work. And I know it was a significant undertaking. I know it took time from your schedules outside the school day, and I appreciate you all doing it. You know, I think it's really interesting that a big issue in front of this district is whether or not our kids get to eat cupcakes during the day. And we've got districts in the state where kids are homeless, and we have foster youth, and we have districts and kids that have real significant problems, and parents in Orinda are going to go crazy about whether or not their kid gets to have a cupcake on their birthday in the classroom. I think it speaks to the sense of entitlement of a lot of parents in this district, and I think that makes me sad that this is what people are going to get all upset about. And it seems like as soon as a decision comes through this district that a parent doesn't agree with, they want to talk about process, they want to talk about transparency, they want to talk about communication. What they don't want to talk about is they just don't agree with the decision. And I look forward to, as a board, we get an opportunity to talk about these board policies. I'm not going to argue either way. I know that my son one day at Glorietta had a donut, a cupcake, a Tootsie Pop, and a Sprite. They weren't all before lunch, but I know 3 of the 4 were before lunch. And I know that I brought the Tootsie Pop because I taught Think First at Glorietta, and I always brought Tootsie Pops. Like I said, I look forward to the board having the opportunity to have the discussion, but what I don't appreciate is that I was at the coordinating council meeting. We broke into small groups. The superintendent engaged us in a really robust process. In each small group was a principal, and then members of the coordinating council, and I got an opportunity to sit in one of those groups, and we had a really good discussion. And we talked about the donut, the cupcake, Johnny's donut, by the way, the cupcake, the Tootsie Pop, and the Sprite, and I felt like what came out of that meeting was pretty unanimous, that the sugar consumption in the schools had gotten out of control specifically, or really highlighted for birthday parties, and that the policy, we should give it a go. So that's what I came out of that coordinating council meeting with, and I feel like we're in that process right now. So, you know, we got a lot of email, again, we got a lot of email after this policy, this practice came into play this year. And just like the email we got, I think that a survey will come up with the exact same results, which will be some really strong opinions, and it'll come out to be 50-50, and then we can decide where we want to go from there if that was something we chose to do. But again, I think we've got some really entitled people who don't like being told what they can or can't do on school sites with their children. And I think if our biggest problem in this district is whether or not kids get to have cupcakes, that speaks a lot to what our district's doing.
Well, we are faced with first world problems after all.
That's right.
That's where we live. I think we now understand pretty thoroughly that the public will think that if something like this happens, it's the board's doing. And this is clearly not the case this time. And I think that what might have gone really well is to have the coordinating council come to the board with a recommendation. And so the board can talk about it. I mean, this is really about board policy. So I would have appreciated being involved in this at some point or another. We are where we are. And for me, I don't have really strong feelings one way or the other. I think candy getting out of hand at school is, you know, if it's getting really out of hand, we need to correct that. And having been served a quite delicious, heavily frosted cookie in our closed session, I don't feel like I'm one to talk about this, but I really believe that moderation is good. And it teaches kids a lesson about when to say no and when to allow themselves an indulgence. And it seems to me that a good compromise would be having one celebration per month in honor of all of those birthdays, and everybody gets to wear a little golden crown or whatever it is, and maybe there's a cupcake, I don't know. But, like I said, I don't have big feelings about this one way or the other. I would love to see the process improve.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the process piece and wish that this had been handled perhaps in a way that everyone felt that they were being heard. I do think that no matter what policy you adopt, some people will be happy with it and some people won't, because some people want all the birthday treats and some people don't. And so you're not gonna please everyone, whether you keep the practice as it is or you change the practice. You know, I agree about moderation. I don't know if my child gets moderation. She likes sugar a lot. My youngest one, who's still in elementary school, and so the fact that she's not getting treats at every birthday celebration at the school has helped me, I think, because it makes me more aware of knowing that at school she didn't get a cupcake that day for, you know, they're still doing their holiday, you know, their free parties, and we are doing a diversity celebration, ancestry celebration on Wednesday for Philippines food, but I don't really have a problem with not having birthday treats, and I can't say that I've seen any like sadness on the part of my daughter for not having birthday treats, even though she really likes cupcakes. So I don't know that, I feel like even with us continuing with this practice, there's still plenty of opportunities for them to have treats in their lunchbox, or treats, you know, at other celebrations, and I'm sort of comfortable with where it's at. I agree that the process could be better, but I don't know that and I don't know that I want to like encourage changing the practice mid-year, because that seems really not the best solution. And even like a once a month, it's still a lot. I mean, my daughter's in 4th grade, she's 25. I mean, they're still celebrating, they're just doing it in a non-food way. So I feel like that's been working, at least from her perspective and from my perspective. And 25 cupcakes, additional cupcakes a year is a lot. I don't know, I mean, I'm sort of comfortable with the practice, not thrilled with how we got to it, but I don't know that, you know, I mean, the feedback I think is always going to be mixed. That's my point. You know, but I've heard positive things about the less sugar, the less ups and downs, the energy.
So this is on for discussion.
Just for discussion, but we could.
Is there something that we would like to do? Is there anything that we should do?
Yeah, I wanted to say something else. Again, I think we can all have different opinions, and we can all, based on the feedback we hear from whether it's parents or teachers or students, our own students, there's a million different opinions out there about this, and the no food at birthday parties, should there be no sugar, should there be no food at all, that you're gonna get a whole range no matter what you do. You know, if we wanted, one thing we could do as a board is, you know, encourage or ask the principals, you know, continue to monitor it and maybe have a I don't know, some sort of follow-up discussion with site council at the end of the year. But I don't feel like that's our job, almost as a board, because our job is policy. And I just wanted to go back to that board policy. The one thing that really surprised me when this came up was how did this happen? when I started getting emails about why did the board make this change. And I looked at the policy and I realized, so it says right here, the district coordinating council will consult, the two sentences I read. And then it says, the next sentence, at the discretion of the superintendent, the council's charges may include planning and implementing. I'm just saying that's, in my mind, why this happened the way it did, and the same thing could happen again because of this sentence. Some other issue can come up, could come to coordinating council, they could make a decision, and it could be carried out. There's nothing there that says it needs to come back to the board. So if we want to allow the policy to remain as is, we can easily face this situation again. If we don't like that and want it to come back to us, then we should modify even just that one sentence in the policy.
I mean, I guess the policy is, as you pointed out, 2006 and 2008, and it might be worth asking for that just to be reviewed to see if it aligns with, you know, our goals.
Yeah, there could be updates
practices.
from the state level since 2006 on
Do you have any thoughts on
a
that?
lot of health things.
We just asked, Matt.
Thanks. I do want to just clarify the process issue here, and I think Matt did a good summary of that coordinating council. We were both at it. And Sarah just recapped the policy and the statement about using coordinating council. So that, before we did anything, I think we followed the policy because the policy said take this to coordinating council. I just want to review again the circumstances. The administrative team was approached by a group of parents last year to change the board policies on this and restrict all sugar at all of our schools. And so when we looked at the information that they presented, which was quite compelling, then I took it to the coordinating council following the policy and said, here's the request, you need to weigh in on this as per our policy. Matt described the process that we went through at that meeting. And the consensus of the group was don't change the policy at this time. Let's try to educate us, teachers and everybody in the district, and find ways to limit it. And so that's what we set out to do. So when we opened the staff development day, we had teachers listen to a presentation, the whole district staff listened to that, and then asked each school site to process what they think. And the principals reported back at one of our leadership team meetings this practice suggestion that we not eliminate everything from the school sites, but that we, so that they didn't have to be in the place of policing it in the classroom, let's do what we actually do. And so that's what we did. That's the process that we followed based on the board policy. Sure, there are lots of other ways that we could have done this, but that's how we went forward with it.
Do we have a survey opportunity as part of LCFF or something so that we can add a question as we go out?
Yes.
You know, just to see, like, to look back at the year and see how people,
Yes, we do.
the parent community is feeling about that. Maybe
Yes,
we
we do.
should
I think that'd be a good
try to
idea.
do that.
Joe, on the coordinating council, when the discussion happened at coordinating council, was there a recommendation from coordinating council? Well, that's a question. It's not a question. It sounds like coordinating council said, don't change the policy, but we recognize that sugar might be getting out of hand. Let's educate. I think what surprised a lot of parents, including parents who were involved in that coordinating council meeting, is how that discussion then translated into a ban. At first, there was that people didn't understand what the ban meant until they understood it was limited to to the birthday. But I guess that's where I'm asking about the process. Is if the coordinating council is supposed to be the one sort of making that recommendation, it sounds like that recommendation morphed on its way from coordinating council to.
No, actually, I don't think it did. Actually, what it did was they said, don't eliminate all the sugar from it.
Right.
Let's not change the policy to do what the original request was from a group of parents.
Right.
Which was to eliminate all the sugar that we can.
So this is a compromise.
Correct. So what we did was then, we didn't eliminate everything, but we took to then our school sites this dilemma and asked for their input as to, well, how can we limit, what can we do? And that's the recommendation that came back, was from what you heard tonight, for the ease of everything, let's do it at birthday parties and leave the rest of it in. And so, we didn't recommend changing any policy, we just put that as a practice, say, okay, we will try this out, we'll see what happens, we'll evaluate it and see what the reaction is. And I think tonight's discussion is a step in taking a look at how that works.
And has there been, has the policy been reviewed to compare it to just current CSBA policies on this issue or anything like that, just to see, since it is on the older side of policies?
No, we haven't done any policy review because, as I said at the meeting, it was don't tamper with the policy. Policy is fine, it's the way it is. Just look at ways to limit the sugar. And so that's what we set out to do.
The reason, just to follow up on the question, I think though that, I get what happened with timing, that those involved in the discussion of the coordinating council it would have been beneficial for them to hear about the choice of how to implement it before it came out the way it came out. I understand the timing was involved and other things, but from a board point of view, or at least this one board member's point of view, the fact that parents had come to the board to ask for a change, the board said no change, the coordinating council said no change, and then there was something perceived as a change, and in fact, many people perceived as a policy change, just created a lot of this misunderstanding. And I'd add to that, what I said before is I actually think that the decision at least has serious tension with the policy as it's written now. I'd support the review of the policy because policy says all over it, encourage. And encourage means encourage healthy choices. I think you have a lot of suggestions here for different ways to do that. If we as a board think encouraging means disallowing in certain places, then we should say disallow. I mean, even in the comment about whether to use it as a reward for student achievement, we leave that as permissive. So I support asking people, continuing to ask people for their view, but for the board to look at it, because if that's gonna be the decision, I think that there needs to be more clarity that that's a policy of the board. I personally, just to put it on the table, I personally don't think it should be. I'd like to echo Charles' comments. I have a sister with chronic illness who, because of that, had onset diabetes. And in an era many years before when it, just like food allergies today, it was uncommon to recognize that. There were a lot of learning opportunities because of that, as opposed to banning it in the classroom. So, in any case.
Yes, I just want to add, again, I think it would be helpful to look at updating this policy. I had forgotten about until you just mentioned the fact that it says encourage on the next page, page 258 in the board packet. On the same policy, it says school staff shall encourage parents or guardians or other volunteers to support the district's nutrition education program by considering nutritional quality when selecting any snacks which they may donate for occasional class parties, and by limiting food served beverages that do not meet nutritional standards to no more than one food or beverage per party. So that right there implies that it is okay to have some kind of snacks or whatever at parties, but
Well,
why
it's not saying.
it's sort of conflicting with our.
Or saying, well, we're not gonna do this at certain parties, birthday parties, because they're more frequent, but as these other.
But at Chinese New Year's or something, you can,
Exactly.
yeah, but it still
I feel
feels
like
to
this
me
is a
like,
compromise and a balance that I'm personally comfortable with. I don't really have a problem with the language in the policy, but if we wanna review it, just to see if it needs updating, I'm not opposed to it. And then if we wanna add a question, then it just ask, how people are, whether they like the policy or not, not the policy, the practice. I don't know.
well, since this one's from 2008, and there's probably updates in the CSBA recommended policy, I think we should at least ask you know, what's the CSBA recommended policy we could decide at a future meeting.
Certainly give direction to review the policy, if that's something that the consensus would like to do.
Why don't we have Sarah contact CSBA?
The CSBA policies are online.
We have staff do it.
Okay.
It's okay, I mean, they're all online and, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
typically
that's fine,
a
it's done.
staff person, so I'm not hearing whether there's consensus or not.
I'd support a review of the policy.
I would too.
Okay, so there's consensus to have staff, review board policy 3550 and signature.
And I'd also like to add, in light of the comments we received, the thing that stands out for me in these comments, really, most, is an echo in here of people asking, I know what you're saying, Julie, that what was done was a compromise, it was, right? It was, people didn't get it at first, but it was meant as a compromise. I think there are other ideas for compromise here, including what Carol was saying, you know, a monthly party or a once every in a while party. I think we have an obligation when we have the community at odds to try to find a way to find as much common ground as possible. I completely agree you're never going to find common ground. I kind of disagree that it's simply a matter of entitlement. I think it's a matter of parents who are really involved in their school and who have differing opinions about evolving, you know, norms of nutrition. And I think that's okay. And, you know, we should react to that. And what I hear in these comments is that, you know, there are a lot of parents who aren't thrilled with the compromise that was chosen.
Well, that's why I was suggesting to maybe do a survey question or
Yeah, no, no.
something to, you know, an end of the year survey, but just ask so we can get a better sense, because it's hard when you're just hearing, even if it's 25 people or a petition, you know, it's hard, you're still not gonna get as many voices as you could. So I think it could be conducive to do that.
Totally agree. And I think that there are probably themes and ideas from these comments that can be both used in the survey and in the review of the policy.
So do we have consensus to try to add something, where would that be? What would be a most appropriate place to add the,
When the schools do their surveys.
just,
yeah.
which would be a good time
Yeah.
too, because
Yeah.
then we'll have seen a year in practice. Okay, so do we
Yeah,
have
I
consensus
think
to
we
ask
should
for something like that?
ask that the, you know, principals, recommend a question or consolidate or whatever, get together, whether it's one or two questions, so we are the best, just.
It sounds like we have consensus on that. Okay.
I'd like to be sure that we get to see the results of those surveys for each school.
And that is fed through coordinating council both ways. Again, I'm just, you know, the policy as we have it has them as a forum for considering what it looks like, and I think it's important that we fed.
You mean the survey question or the results? Or
No, the results, I'm sorry, I jumped kind of topics. I think we should see the results of the survey, but when the board review happens, we'll have to figure out how that happens, the policy.
Sure.
I think we have two things to mention.
Okay, so we've given direction, that was a discussion item, let's move on to discussion item B, Terra Verde Energy Plan.
Thank you, honorable board and Superintendent Jack This issue is being revisited. The board has looked at it in October of 2014 and in November of 2014 there was a special study session which included board members. There was a temperature study and air conditioning study done, and some of this data has been before you before. We're bringing it back because of, I think the issue is getting more imperative, and I agree with Charles that it is a growing issue. I believe, as so many do, that there is global warming, and that we're going to be seeing, you know, warmer and warmer temperatures. We had a
10 days in October where the temperature was above 90 degrees, several that were at 100 degrees. So we took a look at what are some alternatives, including portable air conditioning units that are on wheels. They roll in, they look like R2-D2, and they kick out at best 14,000 BTUs of cool air, which is normally sufficient for a small home, a situation in a room, usually for about 500 square feet. But in a classroom full of children, it's not really adequate. We field tested one unit this past summer, and it turned out it was inadequate for the purpose we had hoped it would serve. And it would seem that given the size of our classroom and the number of students in it, it would take at least 3 or 4 such units to begin to impact the comfort level in the classroom. So if you were to try to equitably distribute them to all classrooms in all schools, it would cost at least close to $250,000. Now, the fundamental problem is that not that we don't need air conditioning, or that we are, we've got equity issues. It's that we have funds that, in order to address the fundamental problem, we have limited funds. We have our Fund 40, which is the only really available fund to address this, and we have a number of projects that are board approved that far exceed that, and in trying to meet some of these other objectives like roofs and painting and some other things that I can't list right now, but are included in the plan that was approved by all of the study committees and by the board in the in the 2013 master plan. We just don't have the money, so that's a reality. There are other measures that are just cosmetic, like putting reflective film on windows, or trying to plant some trees, or putting more shades. You can't really do building insulation, because that too would be extremely costly and involve ripping out walls or trying to pumping in insulation, and it just would be also extremely costly to try to do that. Our buildings were not insulated when they were built in the early 50s, so those walls just don't hold the heat. So given all of these options, there is one other which I think the board may want to consider, and our CBO is going to be available to address that, would be creating heat days so that when the temperature does exceed a certain rate, we would consider letting the kids out in the afternoon, go home. I think that if we've got 10 days in this year, I don't know if we have that many days in our school year to create heat days, so that's another option that has some issues. I think the fundamental solution is that at some point this board pursue a bond measure and do it right. It will probably cost, as Dr. Brown will review, something like $8 to $10 million for us to do that. So the only way I know we could discover that amount of money, or find that amount of money, is to go out for a bond measure. I don't see any other solution that's evident. So that's something for the board to discuss and consider. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rick Brown, who will do a PowerPoint presentation on and update us on the air conditioning issue.
Thank you. Yeah, as Stuart said, basically I'm here to refresh the board, including some of the newer board members from the data and the information we collected a couple years ago. But just to kind of go through the history, we presented to the board in October of 2014 results of a temperature study, which involved putting data loggers in a large sample of classrooms at every site, and basically looking at the relationship between the outside temperature and the inside temperature. Because basically, really what we needed to figure out was, you know, based on fairly, you know, precise projections of what outdoor temperatures were likely to be based on history and where things were going, what did that mean in terms of what indoor temperatures were likely to be in classrooms over the period of a year. We also were asked to put together a rough order of magnitude cost estimate, as Stuart mentioned, for what the cost of providing air conditioning would involve. And so at that first meeting, there was some interest in refining the cost analysis, because at that point there was still some options of potentially doing implementation of AC without triggering some fire safety requirements, which are very expensive at least one or two campuses. And so we did that and came back to the board facilities workshop in November of 2014 and got into a little bit more detail about what some of the financial impacts would be, included looking at what were the savings that were likely to come from some of the energy conservation measures under the Prop 39 program, which we're now in the process of implementing, and what the implications were in terms of some cost savings associated with the solar project, or at that point, the conception of the solar project. We reviewed the data once again in April of 2015 with some updates, and that's sort of the history. The key, as I mentioned, we installed data loggers at 43 classrooms across the 5 campuses, and the main point, I think, to understand is that 20 of the 43 rooms, and again, those 43 rooms don't represent all the classrooms, but they were representative samples on each of the campuses of the classrooms at each campus. So almost half exceeded the ASHRAE comfort standard, approximately 80 school days per year. ASHRAE is the industry standard for what a classroom should be, which basically says it shouldn't be more than 74 degrees. Okay? But for 2 or 3 classrooms at a couple of the sites, even the coolest classrooms still exceeded that standard, 60 school days per year. So that was sort of the key finding. I guess I have to say, unambiguously, you have a problem. That's what the temperature study pretty much found. In terms of, there are the extreme heat days that Stuart talked about, and we do have projections about how many of those a year you would have, given, you know, reasonable projections about outdoor temperature. But even beyond those extreme heat days, you know, there's we operate off of the ASHRAE standard. This is what you know, the study was based on. And then this is a little bit too small, but it basically summarizes what we had in the study sessions where we presented. Again, this is as of 2014. I have to say, based on some work we've been doing with about 40 districts implementing HVAC and AC retrofits, those prices have gone up about 15% since then, just because as demand has increased because of Prop 39, contractors are taking advantage of that, and suppliers. But as he said, you know, 8 to 10 million is not an unreasonable number to imagine. Unfortunately, a big chunk of that, almost, you know, $3 million, is the fire safety upgrades, which there's no getting around. Once you do this level of retrofit, you are going to trigger that based on the current fire safety standards. So those are the numbers, and I'm not sure what else to say other than I'm available to answer any questions and, you know, dig into the details. We did include the temperature study again in your board packet, so if there's any detailed questions there, glad to go over them.
Thank you. What is the fire, like, what would the fire safety upgrades be? I mean, like, what would be our benefit?
Well, I mean, basically, it's more automated type, fire alarm type equipment.
It's
More,
just the alarm equipment?
it's alarm equipment and communications equipment. It's just a, you know, frankly, it's a new standard that the state has put into place. And they upgrade those standards every 3 to 5 years. And so the level of, you know, part of the issue for Rinda is you haven't done a whole lot of upgrades to trigger coming up to speed in many, many years. So you're not only having to upgrade in relation to the last fire safety standards, you have a number of years at a number of sites worth of standards that you would have to comply with. You have fairly antiquated systems.
So it
I
would
can
make
add to that a little
safer.
bit, if I may.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely a safety issue, yeah.
Something simple like a ductwork that crosses between classrooms, when you upgrade, it has to have what's called a fire damper, so that it automatically closes if there's a fire in one room, transferring to another. And we really don't have that. So if you upgrade an air conditioning and heating system that's, you know, integral to your to the schools, you've got to upgrade all of those fire defenses every year. As one example.
I mean, so the benefit is, frankly, you're right, a safer campus. But this is it's a big ticket item because there have been so many years since you've had the kind of work that would trigger you having to do upgrades. That you're kind of you're having to pay for a much longer period of time of change in the regulations.
Yes, well, I appreciate the report and the work that you've done, Rick, on this. And I agree with Stuart's general comment about that we have a lot of facility needs, and we probably should have the conversation about a bond. But before we get into that, regarding the air conditioning alone, you know, even if we did a bond and we did long-range install air conditioning in every school, we have short-term heat issues. And as been brought up earlier in this meeting, there's been parents that have asked and teachers that have asked, could we just put a portable unit in my classroom? And I know in your report you looked at a lot of different temporary units and things other than air conditioning. I actually thought that, you know, there was one sentence somewhere that I was a little disappointed with because it said something about ceiling fans, even when the outside temperature was lower than the inside temperature, wouldn't help that much or something. And it seems like there's gotta be something that fans could improve. But aside from that, even if fans can't improve it that much, could you address the issue of, you know, temporary air conditioning units or portable, or maybe that's a question for Stuart, I'm not sure which. But
Let me take the fans.
What do we do
Yeah.
in, you know, what do we do in the short term is also a problem.
In terms of the fans, what we did is we measured, you know, with these data loggers, we had a sample of the rooms that did in fact have fans in them. And all the sentence was meant to say is the fans did not make an appreciable difference in getting you down below that ASHRAE standard. They helped a little, but not really in any measurable amount that would get you to a better number of days when you're over the ASHRAE standard. Stuart.
Okay, so it was really the fans that we had.
That you already had in place.
That we had in place.
Yes.
And, you know,
Yeah, it was-
potentially, maybe their stronger fans could
Right.
be put in.
These are fans that teachers and, you know, others have sort of brought into the classroom to try to help out. And they may help one or two people, frankly, you know, that are approximate to them, but in terms of the overall indoor room temperature, they really didn't move the data that much.
Right. Well,
And
I
in
just
terms
want to
of-
say,
yeah.
even if we move to installing permanent air conditioning throughout the district, I think we should also be looking at, you know, what better can we do in terms of fans or, you know, non-air conditioning cooling. Fans can be, turned on overnight to where when it cools off at night, they can be circulating air through the classroom to where at least in the morning it's cooler, those kind of things. I would hope that we could have a combination of some of that along with our air conditioning conversation.
Yeah. At the risk of overstepping my bounds, let me not specifically responding to what you're saying. There's no question that having some kind of temporary relief would be a good thing, if there was an easy solution. The only thing I would just, because this is now my 4th presentation to the board, I would say is, and I know the board understands this, but maybe just reinforce. No temporary measure is going to fix this problem. The only thing that's going to fix this problem in the long term is putting an AC. I don't know how to put it any more simply. And I don't mean to overstep my bounds, but we've done these studies in many places. This one is in the arena of, you're going to need to bite the bullet here at some point. And again, I apologize if I'm being too blunt about it, but
I think that Sarah's question is probably more like, well, even if we went out for a bond, you're
Right.
looking at.
It's gonna be a couple of years.
November, Right,
Yeah.
you're looking at a little while, what do you do?
right. And some of the things that Stuart talked about are about as best you can do.
So you're saying heat days really is the best solution?
I think so, I mean,
For the really severe,
one
yeah.
of my concerns that I mentioned in the report, didn't say aloud, but, if we go out and buy 360 of these little R2D2s, my guess is that they will disappear, get broken, we gotta deal with maintenance, just keeping up with them is, because they're portable, becomes, kind of unwieldy for maintenance. And they really are not as effective as we want them to be to cool the rooms down. There's only marginally successful in doing that. The experience in that one test case was, at the risk of throwing a teacher under the bus, the unit ended up right near the teacher,
I think we need to have a different conversation.
Thank you.
We're gonna be talking about goals in a little bit, and we're gonna be talking about painting all the schools, replacing all the roofs, replacing the windows, replacing water lines. Then we're talking maybe about insulation, and now $10–11 million for air conditioning. I don't think there's any doubt we have to have air conditioning. We've got to have some relief in the classroom for both the students and the teachers. But to put a $10 or $11 million air conditioning system on a building that needs the roof repaired, needs insulation, needs the windows replaced, we need to talk about more than putting paint and windows in. We need to talk about a 50 or 60-year-old infrastructure problem that we have. And I think if we're going to go out for a bond, what we really ought to be looking at is a long-term permanent solution to bring our buildings up to par and air condition them and heat them and insulate them and really make them ready to live a longer life. I mean, I've heard Jason say more than a few times, he went to the same school that his kids are going to, and that was not 10 or 15 years ago. That was, sorry to say, Jason.
1950 schools in 1980 and 2015.
Yeah, if we're gonna do a bond, we really ought to do a bond, and we really ought to get, I think Joe has told us in the past about having a consultant come in and say, basically,
Maybe we can have more of this conversation during our goals discussion.
okay,
Well,
I just
Yeah, I
think
mean, I
putting
know
air
there's-
conditioning
I know
on,
there-
goals.
I hear what you're saying, and there's a relation, I just think that maybe we should, if we're going to start going into that direction, maybe we should
okay.
be having that conversation, do we want to do something on the goals in that
Well,
regard?
but Julie, the goals doesn't mention bonds, right?
Well, the goals are there for our review.
No.
Right, but this particular topic under analysis and discussion, it says, you know, on the first page, unless the district has a local bond measure approved in the near future to fund AC, there is not an apparent viable solution.
Well,
So it's.
I agree there's a correlation here,
Yeah.
and, right, and I'm just like, if we're going to start going down, I mean, I'm just suggesting that it is hard to separate it out. I'm just wondering if we really want to move in that direction, the appropriate place to do that would be on the next agenda item. When we're talking about district goals, and should we want to add something into those goals relating to?
Well, I'd like to respond to that. The district goals are on for discussion. If we're gonna add something to the district goals, then it means it's gonna come back next month for approval as a district goal. And now we've just lost a month on our timeline for this whole conversation about a bond. I would just like to say a little bit more about this, just regarding air conditioning, if I could. And I agree with everything Carol said, but, you know, we've had multiple times that we've had these temperature studies. We've had Rick Brown come speak to us multiple times, and before him, NAM, which started back in 2013, I guess. And so this is clearly a continuing problem that we need to address. When we do go out for a bond, and I'm a person who's worked on, you know, multiple parcel taxes, when we do go out for a bond, we have, you know, first of all, this is 2016. This is an election year. This is an even year where if we had a bond on the ballot in 2016, and I'm not trying to rush, and I don't want to say we have to do a bond that's going to do everything and rebuild all our schools, but we seriously need to think about, do we want to consider anything for 2016, or are we going to wait 2 years for 2018? Because that's really what we're looking at. And we already talked about this 2 years ago when it was 2014. I remember Julie and I being on the board and Matt at that time and discussing, you know, this topic came up when we had a facilities workshop. So if we're looking at 2016 for anything, and it doesn't mean it has to be the be-all, end-all bond that's going to take care of it, everything. But if we want to consider it at all, we need to start moving ahead with even the conversation and getting some sort of political advice from someone. I did go, and I think Julie was at the same board workshop in CSBA conference in San Diego, and they said if you're, you know, they had multiple workshops down there regarding bonds and parcel taxes, but more prevalent for bonds because it's, you can pass a bond in an even year with a 55% majority. But they had the steps, analyze your needs, hire a political consultant, get your financial advisor, get your polling firm, and if you're gonna do anything in 2016, you wanna get moving right away. So, because there's timelines in terms of all of that. So, you know, I wanted to encourage us to consider, obviously, we've been analyzing our needs. We have a master facilities plan that was done. We have an original one, then we had an update in June 2013, and there was $10 million of projects just in the immediate list there, aside from solar, and there was a lot more in the previous master facility plan. And obviously, we've been working on the Pulte funds, but I wanted to encourage us to consider getting some political advice so we could consider whether something.
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just trying to keep our conversation on air conditioning, and I know going out for a bond is a recommendation, and that's like part of it, I just don't want to, I guess, I'd like to keep our focus on our questions, and then take comments, and then go back to our discussion.
Okay, so keeping to air conditioning, I agree, I don't see how we're gonna do air conditioning without a bond, because we would basically spend all of our Pulte money on air conditioning, and we wouldn't have anything left. We wouldn't even have enough to do it, and we wouldn't have enough to do any other kind of maintenance. So I think that's unrealistic. So even just for air conditioning, I think it's important, and the first thing, if you were to do that, is to consider doing a poll to see if our voters would even, you know, consider it and for what. So,
Are there more questions for
So
them, or?
all that is gonna take a long time if we do that. Then we're still presented with the problem of how do we give relief to our teachers and our students?
We're talking long-term solutions.
Yeah.
Short-term problems.
So,
Yeah.
what I'd like to do is, I think we should have a discussion about large financial spending on future needs for our district. But I think what we should do is try and, if we can, come to consensus today. I'd like to see us do what we need to do to move forward on heat days. And then I'd like to have Director of Facilities and/or people he works with look at the classrooms that would benefit, even if only by 4.8% of reflective window film. And I'd like to look at putting ceiling fans in every classroom that doesn't have them. So, you know, in the short term, I really do think we need to look at student heat days. I know some districts do it. I see a lot of challenges with student heat days, but I also see it, you know, let's get our staff and our students out of those classrooms at the hottest time of the day. I think there could be challenges about that, but I still think it's something that we should take a really hard look at, figure out a way to move forward on it. I like the idea of reflective window film because there actually is some benefit there. Windows in every room, in certain rooms are facing direct sunlight. And I like looking at ceiling fans in the classrooms that don't have. That's what I think we should do in the short term.
We're just wondering.
And I'd like to hear what
Questions, I would love to hear
I'd like to hear what
comments,
staff has to
and
think
then
about that
I'll-
I
suggestion.
want to ask one more question,
Yeah.
because I love the all out up front of trying to do as much as we can in the short term. Portable air conditioner units. All right, we've tried one room and it hasn't worked out well. And I understand the long-term maintenance challenges of buying, you know, a whole fleet of R2D2s, you know, moving all around. On the other hand, could you talk about the benefits, the pluses and minuses? We've had parents clubs at a few of the schools say they're willing to pay for some to try it out. Is it worth trying some different variations out in different rooms as part of an all-out effort?
Clearly, south-facing rooms are gonna be the hotter rooms. In the summer, of course, when the sun is higher in the sky. It may be beneficial to try to identify those classrooms at every school that tend to be the hottest all across the district, to see if that would somehow reduce the number of units, to see if maybe 2 units will alleviate
Do something.
something. I also think it would be worthwhile while I'm talking to have our CEO give you a little bit more information on the heat days concept, so that you have the benefit of that in your analysis. We could do some kind of survey of where it would be most effective and see if those stopgap measures will, you know, have some benefit. I'm not opposed to it, and I'm certainly happy to report back to the board on what I think would be a stopgap approach, you know, and what it would cost. But, you know, again, you know, it's putting a Band-Aid on fundamental problems.
Of course we are, but, you know.
Yeah.
Teresa, can you address the cost on heat days?
Unfortunately, I do not have good news regarding heat days. What my task at hand was, if we were to reduce the number of instructional minutes by having more minimum days on a day where we knew it was going to be too hot. A minimum day or what you call a early release day, either one of those. We would have to district-wide have everyone released early. And the available minutes, because we must maintain a minimum level of minutes, it varies by grade level, could afford 2 days. And that would be,
You're saying 2 days without having to make up the days.
without having to make up the days, and basically you would be releasing the
students on 2 days on, and you'll take a regular school day that they're there till, 2, 3 o'clock, let them leave early. So unfortunately, because it would be district-wide, I'd have to take the minimum available minutes and use that as the base, and how many days could I do that, and that would be 2. Unfortunately,
But
considering the
some
number.
districts do this.
Yes, there are, and it all depends on your instructional minutes, and I'm going by the available minutes that we exceed the minimum required minutes. You still have to maintain minimum required minutes out of the 180 school days.
So I grew up with snow days.
Yeah.
So you would, if there were too many, you would have to put them up.
That would be
Usually at
keeping.
the end of the year, where it's nice and hot.
That would be keeping in line with what our calendar looks like. Yes, you could add days, or say, there's no school day today, but then you'd have to add that day somewhere else in the calendar. So the option I said about 2 days was not changing the calendar at all. I was just saying today or early release day for everyone. You could have 2 of those days. But to do anything more, you would actually change the calendar. You would have to add additional days to the calendar if you were to take a heat day, similar to a snow day.
And on the reflective window film and ceiling fans, do you have a cost estimate on those?
No, I don't at this moment. I have done it before, in Walnut Creek. It was effective to the extent that, the solar boom in the classroom was reduced. We have a number of about 5%, I think it is, 4.8. That, it reduces the heat, which, it's helpful. But it's, it's not, again, doesn't achieve that comfort level that's required for the students.
Are there other
But we
questions?
can get that information.
Yeah, well, I guess it would depend if you're doing it only on certain south-facing windows, it would be an
Right,
analysis based
that would be
on
where it would be most effective.
deeper analysis than just X number of units.
Could we get at least that reflective film installed before, say, May, when it starts heating up?
Yes.
Before May.
I'm sorry?
In terms of the temperature study, it starts really more like late March, early April. So if you wanted to.
Could we do it that quickly, Stuart?
Yes, depending on the contractors that are available to do it there. There aren't an infinite number of such contractors, but
Right.
we could probably make it happen.
And installing the ceiling fans as well?
That's a little more familiar.